Attractive teachers. Did you know which students had a crush on you? And what is the strangest or most inappropriate thing you overheard said about you? Young male middle school student teacher here. I know quite a few of them who have a crush on me. There's a new fad where they tell each other secrets and say, "Ooh, exposed!" Since when did snitching become popular? Anyway, I always get told who has a crush on me, and quite often some of the girls will drop by to leave their athletic bags or instruments, etc. in the classroom, and then they bring their friends in with them. When they leave, I always hear comments like, "I wish I had him as my teacher." My top 3 worst incidents. 1. I had a girl come in at lunch. She told me, "Mister, I like you." Knowing full well what she meant, I tried to play it off and said as nonchalant as I could, "I like you too, you were a great student." She was like, "No, I mean I really like you." I could not believe the tenacity. 2. Another student asked me to take a picture with her towards the end of the school year. I obliged, and on the last day, she printed it out and gave it to me with her Instagram on the back and a message about how cute I was. 3. A girl found my Facebook and saved my profile picture as the background to her phone. I deleted my Facebook oh so promptly afterward. Story 2. My cousin is a very pretty lady and teaches 7th grade reading. A lot of students were harassing her on Facebook and trying to add her, so she just made one under a fake name. Still get to communicate with family and stuff, no more harassment. Funny story though, she has a fake chest and she's fairly small framed, so she would find pics drawn by her students of her with giant melons in the back of textbooks with dirty things like, "I want to do some nasty stuff to Mrs. Blank." Story 3. I was not attractive, but freshman girls still crushed on me when I taught at university as a grad student. I would have thought they were just flirting for grades, but they were always the nerdy, hot type that already earned good grades. One called me doctor, told her I didn't have a PhD, called me professor, told her I was just an instructor. She asked me if she could call me professor anyhow, then she asked if I would like to get a drink. Told her to ask again when the class was over if she was serious. She was. She called me professor. It was a really great score for a guy who looks like a catcher's mitt. Story 4. Not really attractive at all, and didn't notice a thing till I asked, in a college lab, "Are there any questions?" And this one guy, an older student about my age, raised his hand and said in front of the whole class, "Yeah, will you go out with me?" So that was kind of a clue. Story 6. My high school has an organization where about once every 6 weeks, kids who are considering teaching can get out of their classes to help elementary teachers and get a feel for a classroom. My friend and I both did this, and she was the music teacher's aide. She had a little boy, maybe 5 to 7, ask her to marry him. She awkwardly laughed and told him that she was a little too old for him. He grinned and said, "Don't worry, I'll wait for you," and told people he was going to marry her for the rest of the day. Kids can be weird, but cute weird sometimes. Story 7. Not a teacher, but I had a couple of crushes. One was a counselor. I remember dressed up in a little suit and tie and tried to impress her, and my kindergarten teacher acted jealous. But I also had a crush on a little girl named Amber. She was absent one day, and I gave her a get-well gift on the next day when she came back. She had no idea who I was. She pretty much treated me the exact same way women treat me today. She was like, "Yeah, whatever." Poor guy's been striking out since kindergarten. Hang in there, man. It's just around the corner. Story 8. Among several personal questions was, "Do you have a girlfriend?" And once a student called me honey. It's especially icky because they're just 8th graders. Edit. I feel obliged to defend my students given the general character of anecdotes featured in this thread. None of my kids were little crazed monsters or pre-skanks or anything. The subject and method by which I teach is by necessity, more personal and social than typical, and so there's bound to be a girl here or there that crushes on a teacher a little bit, but they're good kids. Story 9. I'm not much to look at now, but in the mid-90s, I was a much handsomer fellow. I was working at a Catholic high school at the height of my best hairstyle and my size 28 waist. Those are both gone now. The first day I started, a group of giggling teenage girls were huddled and whispering and looking at me. One of them worked up the guts to come over to me and say, "Hello, sir. One question, please. Just, she was blushing. Are you married?" So yeah, a bunch of 16-year-old girls were hoping I was single. What they thought I'd do if I was, I'm not sure, but they were just crushing. One day I'm walking down a long hallway at the school and was vaguely aware of a group of girls behind me whispering. I didn't realize they were focused on me until I heard one say, "Look at his butt." I stopped without turning around, and they burst into loud, embarrassed laughter and then scattered like cockroaches when the light turns on. Now, in 2017, I look like a poster from About Schmidt, but I had my day once upon a time. I don't know how I feel about fondly reminiscing on that, given the context. Story 10. I'm a student teacher and was asked if I was an 8th grader by a student in my first week teaching, which doesn't make me attractive, but it does make me seem more age appropriate for my middle schoolers. I work with kids with special needs, and I knew that one of the boys, nonverbal, had hit puberty when he came over to me and gently kissed my forearm and then made his happy noise. It's kinda like a zzzz, which led to a new rule that we do not kiss teachers. And it was kinda cute though. He's not one for affection in general. Story 11. I wouldn't say I'm attractive, but being a TA in college, and a lot of girls get flirty for favorable grades, some try harder than others. Then during office hours, right before the finals, girls would be coming in with push-up bras and tiny shorts like that's going to work. Once I subbed for my buddy's high school class, and one of the girls sat front row center giving me the F eyes the entire hour. It was a little uncomfortable. The most inappropriate thing I've overheard said about me wasn't sexual, but rather about my military experience, just spreading a lot of untrue rumors. Story 12. Not crush related, but when I was a senior in college, taking a 400 level poli-sci course, our nerdy hot professor uploaded an enormous amount of nudes to our class's online portal. That was an interesting hour and 45 minutes the next time we had class. Story 13. When I was in junior high, there was a guy who I honestly couldn't tell where he stood in the popularity hierarchy, but he always thought he was hot crap. Well, we got an influx of 24 to 26-year-old female teachers, which he, for the most part, hit on, which he was flatly denied. He didn't take no for an answer and proceeded to harass and then assault 2 of the teachers. Not sure what all he said to them, but he did grab one's butt and tried to put himself on the other. Story 14. Teaching English as a second language. Had a 14-year-old girl say, "I want to eat you." I jokingly asked with a laugh, "You want to eat me?" She stared me dead in the eye and said, "Yes." She meant meet me. Very awkward. Story 15. I had a hot English 101 teacher. She was obsessed with Van Halen. One day she was going to give out some extra credit if someone could guess her favorite song of theirs. I didn't think of hot for teacher until after class. No one did, but I think about it all the time now. Got it bad, I've got it bad. I'm hot for teacher. Dude, that song's gonna be stuck in my head now. Sorry for the singing. Story 16. Okay, 2 stories. One of my friends who was a bit awkward would always say, "I love you," to an attractive teacher, typically once or twice a week. At first, she would react to it by saying things like, "What? Why? Stop it." Then her reactions became a bit less noticeable, and during the last week of school, she said it back, and his face lit up like you wouldn't believe. 2. A male student, 18, and a female teacher, 22, met in school and later got married, so that was a thing. Story 17. I had one of my high-functioning autistic students tell me straight up that all the moms call me handsome. Keep in mind, this was in the middle of a lesson on the French Revolution, and I'd asked a question about the bourgeoisie. He raised his hand and came with that gem. Story 18. Former English teacher here. When I was student teaching, I carpooled with another guy, a Spanish student teacher. We both went on to graduate and taught for a while before both leaving the profession for different reasons. But I remember kids talking about him. Don't get me wrong, he was a good-looking guy, but when we co-taught a class, we introduced ourselves to the 7th grade English class. It was my first class, Spanish was next period. It quickly got out of hand. I'm Mr. Blank, and this is Mr. Spanish teacher. We are from local college of college stuff, and we'll be here for the next few months as your student teachers. The cooperating teacher was just watching from the back. I like video games, books, movies, and cooking. My buddy said some stuff about himself. Do you guys have any questions for us? All the boys raised their hand to ask what my favorite video game was. All the girls raised their hands to ask him, does he have a girlfriend? How many push-ups can he do? How do you grow your beard to look so nice? At this point, the cooperating teacher stepped in. Spanish boy and I had a beer after school and effing laughed a lot. Story 19. French teacher here. Teenagers are just constantly inappropriate and need very little encouragement. I got asked to prom. Had boys tell other teachers that they thought I was hot. Had a parent accusingly tell me that she now understood why her son loved French, which I took to mean that my innovative skill set had inspired him. I didn't mind though. It meant that I had a class with 12 previously disengaged 16-year-old boys come back for extra homework and revision classes every lunchtime and after school, and every one of those bags of hormones passed. Story 20. On my first day as a middle school intern, one of my students told his friend, "Miss Blank is mine." I walked behind his seat right as he said it, and he just about died from embarrassment when he figured out that I heard him. One of my high school students told me that my intelligence was sexy. That was one of those moments where you look for another adult who can verify for any potential future record that you weren't just creeping on on that particular student. Story 21. I'm not bad and frequently the youngest female teacher my students have ever had. I teach middle school, so 13 to 15 or 16. It's funny, the boys that actually have a crush are super obvious about it, but they just act embarrassed and think they're hiding it well. Not at all. The most inappropriate comments I've gotten to my face are, "Come to a love hotel with me. What position do you like?" And just a straightforward, "Come be intimate with me." All of those several times in both English and Japanese. I shut all of those down real quick. I also overheard comments, mostly they just talk about my bust. Story 12. I used to teach high school math in New York, and a good college friend of mine taught high school chemistry in Florida for a couple of years. He's a pretty good-looking dude. We used to swap stories, but he has one much better than all of mine. One Valentine's Day after school was over, he returned to his science classroom to find a card on his desk. On the inside was written, "I want to periodically bang you on this table." Also, there was a small bag of hard drugs inside the card. Naturally, he chopped it up on his desk and did the whole bag. Just kidding, he went straight to the principal's office and gave him everything. Story 23. So not me, because I A, am not attractive, and B, teach in an elementary school, but I have watched students do so throughout my high school and college career. I've witnessed this. The worst was in college with my theory teacher. He was 29 and a couple of the other girls had huge crushes on him. Sometimes staff would attend the parties and one girl in particular would sit on his lap and flirt shamelessly. To be fair, I think they actually dated secretly for a bit. Story 24. Was a student with a very attractive teacher. She was maybe 25 or so when I was a freshman, and all of the guys talked about her constantly. She always kept the door to her classroom locked during lunch, and one day me and two other kids were waiting outside for her to unlock the door. I was waiting there because I was lame, but the other two kids were friends who were talking about her. Okay, so this conversation took place like 10 years ago, but here is about how it went. "Gosh, Miss Blank is so hot." "I know, right?" "No, seriously, I know, man. No, but seriously, if she was here right now, oh, the things I do." He then proceeded to mime spanking her by literally spanking the door while we stood there. I guess like any kid who doesn't understand intimacy might be prone to do. I was maybe 3 feet away and not really sure whether to smile and play along or be horrified. And as he spanks the door a 4th or 5th time, Miss Blank actually opens the door from the inside. She looked at all 3 of us and said, "You boys need to learn to not talk so loud." And then we just went in and sat down. All in all, not a bad outcome actually, but I still wonder what was really going through her mind. Story 25. Finally, something I can answer. I teach junior and senior high school as a substitute teacher. I graduated a year ago, so I haven't landed a full-time position yet. I've had multiple grade 10 students write inappropriate comments on my formal evaluations given out during the last day of my final student teaching practicum. These included, "I want to be intimate with Miss Teacup Grad. Miss Teacup Grad is so hot. I want to be with you." All caps for extra emphasis, I guess. During my first student teaching practicum, I had a grade 9 student who was a good foot taller than me block me from leaving the doorway when he repeatedly asked for a hug. I had another grade 9 student slap my butt. I was so surprised I honestly didn't know how to handle it. Teaching is fun. Story 26. Kids or young adults thinking that an older authority figure is attractive is fairly normal and common, but it can get creepy if it gets too close. I had a young teenage boy get a little too informal and familiar with me when emailing me over time, as students can do if they need to. He ended up sending me a picture of an anime character who had the same hair color as me wearing a small bikini. He commented that he liked the show series she was from because he thought I looked a lot like her. Brakes gotta be slammed right then and there. Story 27. My sister is an attractive and overly nice 24-year-old teacher, grade 7, so it definitely happens a lot. Last semester, she started noticing stuff going missing from her desk, like her sports bra from her gym bag, but thought it must just be her carelessness. About a week later, her boyfriend, also a teacher, noticed her light was on and went to go check. He found one of her students, belt unbuckled, standing in front of her pair of heels that he rooted through her desk drawer to find. Now, if that wasn't creepy enough, you have to know her feet stank. Like I lived with her for 18 years. It was like mayonnaise and tuna broiling out in the summer sun. Still don't understand that kind of desperation. All of that was awful. Story 28. I'm not a teacher, but I think this is still relevant. We had an annual tradition of end-of-year skits in my program in high school. The skits revolved around roasting the teachers for their quirks. There was no holding back because the teachers involved were chill with us, advanced program students who liked learning, and occasionally it went too far. One year we had a new teacher who was smoking hot. and couldn't come up with things to mock her about. All we could do was try to joke about how nice she is and some meta jokes about how hard it is to make fun of her. It turns out one group created a good line to use for her. In his most racist Asian accent, he was Asian himself, don't worry, one guy looks her straight in the eye and says, "Are you sure you teacher? 'Cause dang girl." At this point the room was howling with laughter. All the guys were agreeing with him and his teacher turned beet red. Her face never truly stopped blushing after that one. Great teacher though. Story 29. Well, I'm not attractive or a teacher or even a student anymore. I went to high school in the 80s. In my junior year, about 1985, I had study hall in the afternoon. It was in the school cafeteria and we were assigned seats, which were lunch booths. I sat in a booth with two other guys. I was pretty nerdy, so was the other kid whom I was friendly with. He went on to get a doctorate in physics, and there were a couple of cute girls behind us. This was the study hall where I came up with the song, "Calculator in my pocket makes me wanna bang," that I serenaded to them. But this is not that story. Anyhow, the other guy of the three of us had a crush on the teacher monitor assigned to the class. She was pretty young, probably about 24 or 25 years old. He used to stare at her and talk about how hot she was. Like, not quiet, so that only us two could hear, but fairly loud so that she could hear. And he used to go up and talk to her whenever he could. One day he started making jokes about how it must be really cold today. Not knowing what he was talking about, I asked him, and he said, loud enough that her nipples were visible. And he kept on talking about how hot she was and about her nipples very loudly. I was a fairly obnoxious nerd, but he started really creeping me out. Soon after, he was no longer in that study hall with us. I ended up running into him years later, like around 98. Not sure how he recognized me, but I was picking up some Chinese food, and so was he. Found out after high school he joined a seminary and was becoming a priest or reverend or some other religious pursuit. Go figure. Story 30. I was a building sub for a high school last year. There's one girl in particular that springs to mind. She would find out where I was subbing for the day and drop by a couple of times. One day, after passing her in the hallway and saying good morning, I very loudly heard, "My gosh, she's so fine." I ignored it and kept on my way. Another time she came to talk to me in between classes, and I told her to get going before she was late. She walked to the door, stopped and said, "By the way, mister, no homo, but you have a nice butt," and walked away. Definitely made sure to keep my distance after that one. Story 31. I don't consider myself attractive, but my third year teaching, I remember running late to get my 8th period class on the first day of school. I am pretty short, so I typically blend in with the students. On this particular day, I remember wearing black pants and a blue sweater, so I blended in even more. Anyways, the 30-second alarm had just buzzed, so everyone started bolting for whatever door they needed to get to. I was rushing, but I knew that one of the TAs would already be there with the students, so I wasn't running for the door. I was maybe 50 feet away when I heard the two 8th graders say, "Dang girl, you fine," and "Girl, what's your name?" I didn't think too much of it because I figured they'd get in the classroom before I could turn around. Right then I heard, "Dang ma, you got a nice butt. Bet you got a pretty face." That's when I turned around. I was in front of my door, and one of them said, "Finally, what's your name?" To which I responded, "Are you going in this classroom?" After they both nodded, I signaled for them to come in. Once they were in, I walked in, set my books down on my desk, and introduced myself. The look of pure horror on their faces was priceless. They got a referral for sexual harassment, and when they spoke to the counselor, they begged to change classes. I only saw them once or twice after that. Story 32. Not me, but my friend got so embarrassed. Basically, our English teacher is an absolute babe, and she was walking towards us on the way to class, and I say to my friend really loudly, "Hey X, what do you think of Y?" And he goes, "Oh my gosh, she's an absolute babe. She's practically perfect. I would love to be your fiance." And I peed myself laughing, and when he turned around, he sees her and goes blood red. Man, I'm near certain he made the cross with his hands. Miss Y just winked at him and said, "Morning, boys." Story 33. A student raised his hand while we were going over homework in class and said, "Miss, I have a question." I said, "Let's hear it." He pulled out a boombox from under his desk, pressed play, and stood up on the desk. Just as he did, Backstreet Boys' "All I Have to Give" came on with his arms outstretched and asked, "Will you go to prom with me?" I turned so red I had to walk out of the room. It's pretty obvious when a student has a crush on you. If they're not doing something like this, they are blushing and struggling to get a sentence out when you are working with them in class. Story 34. Wife is an attractive teacher. She can definitely tell which students have a crush on her. High schoolers are not subtle. She was asked to be a +1 to somebody's wedding once. Then the student reminded her the law was, after 90 days post-graduation, they could date. Also, when the guys find out she's married, they ask only the polite questions and give non-committal, "Oh, that's nice," response to all the answers. Story 35. I'm not a teacher, and I may be too late to the party for this, but when I was in high school, there was one particular male coach who got lots, and I mean lots, of female attention. Girls would come by his classes just to say hello. They'd stop and hug him in the hallway, sometimes get in trouble just to get put in detention because he oversaw that for a while. Just being around witnessing this crap was crazy to me because I had never, and still to this day have never again, seen girls throwing themselves at a guy and fawning all over him. It was like this coach was a gosh dang rock star. Later, when I was in college, I learned that he went to jail for banging like all of them. Story 36. This comment will get buried, but wow. Back in my younger days when I was a teacher, the 9th and 10th grade girls at the international school where I taught hit on me all the time. At the beginning, I was pretty clueless about it. It never occurred to me that 14 to 16-year-old girls were going to do that. I was around 28 years old, single, athletic, and good looking, but that was many years ago. A few of the girls were relentless. A few were stunners. But I was never tempted. For those of you who look at 15-year-olds and think, yeah, I'd hit that, you have never heard them talk. I enjoyed being around them, but no. They used to come sit with me at lunch and in the hallways. They would either give you that blurry-eyed, I'm effing you in my dreams look, or they would kind of stumble from brain freeze. The most brazen one just rubbed her hands on my chest and stared into my eyes. No joke, her name was Barbara Jean, but she was known as BJ. Okay, I did give her a second thought, but no. Oi, did this guy just say he was around 30 and was having second thoughts about a 15-year-old? Why don't you have a seat right there? Story 37. I'm a primary school teacher. The girls will just come and find reasons to be close to you. Stand next to you and lean into you, try to lock arms, hug you, etc. They'll say that they really like you. Then they try to touch my beard too. I go to the gym a lot and I'm starting to get a decent looking body. They ask me to show them my muscles or if I have a six-pack. That can get pretty weird. One time a girl brought in a plastic rose for me on Valentine's Day. That was the sweetest one, and I've actually still kept that. Funnily enough, it's still the only thing I've ever received on Valentine's Day. Story 38. I once had this girl in Archaeology 101 who was creepily obsessed with me. It kept getting more and more blatant until one day she somehow wrote, "Love you" on her eyelids. Don't ask me how she did it. Anyways, I wasn't around long enough to worry about it too much because soon the US government sent me on an expedition to do a bit of research about the Ark of the Covenant. Weird times, man. Story 39. I'm an attractive female high school teacher, and oh my gosh, do I ever hear stuff said about me. They don't seem to realize how much their voices carry. The one that amused me the most just seemed to not make sense. The boys were waiting for the bell to ring, and I was at my desk using my computer. Students assume when you are using a computer, you are sucked into some kind of vortex where your ears don't work. They were talking about how hot I was, and one kid said, "Yeah, I'd love to cover her in chocolate sauce and just..." I had so much trouble not laughing. Story 40. I was an English teacher in a training school back in my country, and my students were either teenagers or not older than 21 or 22. I was a year or two older from them, so most of the girls in my classes were attracted to me. Relationship with students was a big no-no for me, but once one of my students got my number somehow and texted me late at around 11 wishing me a good night. I didn't text her back and instead looked up her name from records, and apparently she was one of the most attractive and smartest students of my classes. The next day at night, she texted me again, wishing a good night. So I said, "What the heck?" And I texted her back, "We are getting married coming August." Story 41. As a college professor, I try not to know, and fortunately I've blocked out any really inappropriate comments. But I do have 2 stories for Reddit. 1. I got a love letter from a student. It was on the last day of the semester, and this was a 101 non-program class. He was not in my program, so I'd never teach him again. It read like a stalker letter. "I've been watching you." And at the end of it, he asked me out. I think he meant well, but for me it was creep level 10. I took it directly to HR. Since I was an adjunct at the time, they literally said, "You can say yes if you want." I sputtered out a no, or something similar. Maybe even left them with the letter. I ran out of there since the HR rep was chirping about how sweet it was. 2. Had a student get expelled because he did threaten me. He said over email it was adorable how awkward I was and that I didn't have to be so nervous. I was like, I'm not nervous, I'm just like that? And I realized he was being complimentary, but I prefer to keep on the topic of curriculum. He wrote a freaking diatribe back, including commenting on how I was dressed. When they took his badge, he scared the DAA and security so much that they gave me mace and stationed someone outside the class afterwards. Incidentally, both stories occurred in the same 101 course, different sections, years apart. Story 42. I was an orientation counselor for incoming students during the summers at my school. I'm a good-looking guy. Back then I was in the gym every day too, and I'm personal and smart, etc. The other counselors pegged me as most likely to bang a freshman, and their jokes were non-stop throughout training. I was also the arts counselor, so I was getting all of the incoming actors and designers, dancers, cheerleaders, etc. Basically all of the stereotypical hot girl majors fell under my purview. Anyway, every single session at least one of my students would make a pass at me. Not always a girl. Before you ask, no, I didn't bang any freshmen. Some of the come-ons were really weird. Like one girl kept telling me I had nice hands and it looked like I had strong fingers. Another girl asked me if I thought her boobs were fake and if I wanted to find out. Obviously, they were real, but I wouldn't have minded checking. Except, of course, I'm a gosh dang professional. I wouldn't do that to a poor, impressionable freshman. One guy said that since we were both in college now, we should experiment. I crap you not. The best was a junior transfer student I had. She was crazy hot to the point where all the other male counselors found excuses to constantly visit my group that session. When she walked up on the very first day, her chest practically bursting out of her shirt, short plaid schoolgirl skirt kicking up, she said, I swear to God, I'm only here because I have to be to get my scholarship. I'm not going to sleep with you. Well, color me shocked. I really had no response to that, so I just kind of stammered, okay, and then quickly turned and walked over to another counselor. I'm sure she found it hilarious. 2 days later, at the end of the session, everyone was saying goodbye, and she writes her number on a post-it and says, remember that thing I said when we met on the first day? They were both lies. And then she walked away. Gosh freaking dang. And then in the intervening 2 weeks between the end of that session and the start of the school year, I guess she got back with her ex-boyfriend because we never got together. Brutal. Other than that one girl, I always made a point of being very professional, thanking the crushers for being so flattering, but no thanks. Fast forward a few years later, I and every one of my students from that time have graduated. I had this weird streak of like 5 or 6 of the girls who had crushes on me back then randomly showing up at bars I frequented, telling me how much of a crush I was. One used the term dream conquest, and then coming back to my place. So it all worked out swimmingly in the end. Story 43. Not the attractive teacher anymore, but 10 or so years ago when I was younger and hotter, walking down the corridor on the way to my office when I overheard the girl in the front of me remark, yes, I have the 2 hottest teachers, next. Being the a-hole that I am, knowing I was one of them, I asked her who they may be. She didn't back down. She looked me straight in the eye and told me that it was me and one of my good mates. I still recount this story regularly amongst my teacher friends, recalling the good old days when I still had my looks. Story 44. Well, I guess I was popular with my middle school students, as when I left my old language school, several of the middle school girls cried and told me they didn't want to hear about my fiance. They also kept telling me they wanted to do homestay at my house. I told them I lived in a cardboard box. They did make me a nice card when I left with hearts all over it and congratulated me on my future wedding. Story 45. I was 24, an assistant basketball coach in the Valley in Texas, border of Mexico Valley. I was 6 foot 2 inches, about 190, benching 300. Not ripped because I couldn't force myself to eat right, but in very good shape. I was basically harassed by the office ladies 2 or 3 times a week. But student-wise, I basically ignored the girls because jail in Texas is a death sentence. So yeah, F that. Well, the one crazy moment, I was a 9th grade teacher. Had a 17-year-old girl in 9th grade who was really well endowed up top. I'm at my desk, not really paying attention, and she comes up, bends all the way over, and has no bra on. She did this before I had looked up from what I was doing. As my eyes make their way up, there was no avoiding what was basically right in front of me. I probably looked for her under a second, then met her eyes and didn't break eye contact until she got uncomfortable. She asked me some BS question, then went back to her seat, upset I didn't give her a bigger reaction. Some of these are pretty awkward to read, man. All of them are awkward to read. Story 46. This is my wife's 3rd grade teacher story, but it's one of my favorite. One of her coworkers was monitoring her class and overheard a student saying, Mrs. Blank is so hot. In shock, she told her student, that is no way to talk about a teacher. The student paused for a moment in confusion and replied, but I wasn't talking about you. Story 47. My brothers are identical twins, both charming and good looking. The first did a training practical during his studies in our hometown school. He was about 22 at the time. The second returned home for summer holidays a few months later. He discovered that the entire senior class who just graduated was already in love with him. Having no moral obligation, he took full advantage. It was terrible. Story 48. Former middle school teacher, not attractive male. On my last day at one school, a small group of girls, 10 to 11, delivered a small box, all giggling with a little note, "We like you so much and want you to have something nice." They had bought me a pure silk tie, as I only had fun ones and not a serious one. The end of the day came around and I thanked them for all being wonderful classmates and walked them to the bus. It was at this point the small group of girls erupted in tears, crying out, "You're going to forget about us." I had no idea what to do, so I put my new tie on and I said, "No, I couldn't." They were quieter, but it didn't really help much. That tie is still here after a decade. I wear it for interviews only. When teaching older students, they were not subtle, but my most cringe moment was a parent-teacher evening. A student arrived who had been too forward literally 2 hours ago. I gave my assessment of her progress and ended with "she can get distracted in class," to which the mother said, "And I can see why." The mother was grinning, the daughter was grinning, the husband was less happy. The mother even offered her mobile number for supplying study aids. The chat ended very quickly after that. Story 49. My last year in high school, we got a new male teacher. A gorgeous man, honestly. I don't know what he taught, but he ended up sending quite a few girls to the office to Snapchatting photos of him to each other. One girl asked him if he would sleep with her. He ended up switching schools after the first semester. A dang shame. Apparently he was a great teacher, and there were rumors he had already moved from another school because of the same issue. Story 50. I had just started teaching in a Japanese junior high school, and I was pretty nervous. A few months in, it was October, so I decided to do a Halloween lesson, wearing a basic Halloween costume, but it required changing clothes. My English teacher suggested I'd use the supply office, which has tinted windows you can't see through. The boys found out I was changing in there and immediately made plans to try and see me changing, including trying to open the windows. Lucky for me, they were locked. Later that week, boys would try to get me to jump to see my chest bounce and make lewd hand gestures at me. I finally had enough and informed the teacher it made me uncomfortable. She told their homeroom teacher. They had detention, which included a long lecture from their homeroom teacher about how people are affected by words and what's appropriate and what's not, and they were forced to apologize to me. I also had to deliver a speech to them in Japanese and try not to cry while doing it. I was a new teacher, fresh out of college, and badly shaken by the experience. I didn't want to go to school the day after the incident, but of course I did. They were about 15, and I know boys will be boys, but dang, that's just such a terrible phrase. They are being raised to become men, and everyone should learn early about respecting other people, especially their dang teachers. One other female teacher said I had overreacted. Maybe I did, but what was I supposed to do? Let them continue with their blatant sexual harassment for the next 2 years? F that crap. And F for backwards but they're just kids logic. No. So yeah, not really a fun story, but there it is. I've since moved on to being a translator. Middle schoolers suck sometimes, but I had way more positive experiences than negative. Story 51. I used to tutor an Italian girl one-on-one with English. We had a good 9 or 10 months with great progress until she sent me a photo of her in the gym, then a photo in the changing rooms, then a photo in her bedroom. All very suggestive. I had to let her down. It wasn't right or professional, and I'm very glad I did the right thing. Story 52. I get to relive the glory days. I was an anatomy TA for 3 semesters. During the more sexual parts of the labs, I would always drop jokes that were supposed to be tension breakers, but were really just to feel out the better-looking girls in all the classes. Though you would be surprised at the stuff the students would say in the guise of anatomy humor as well. So I guess this is more about me having crushes on the students? Oops. But seriously, those 3 semesters were the greatest time I've ever had in my life. Story 53. The high school girls made a game of tweeting pics of me, usually my butt or with hearts and the like. One of my players texted me when a girl posted while still in my class, so I pulled it up and put it on the projector. After a few minutes of the class making fun of her, I matter-of-factly announced that if I were a woman and they were boys, they'd all be suspended. It stopped after that, but every now and then girls who graduated since try to flirt when they see me around town. Story 54. So I am currently teaching English at a university in Vietnam. I am teaching in a place that is off the beaten track, so these students aren't too familiar with foreigners. First day I have one of my classes and the students are working on something in their book. One of the students raises her hand and calls me over. I ask her if she understood the exercise and she says, "You're beautiful." I think it's mostly that I am a foreigner and exciting. I get stopped for photos by most people here. Story 55. Middle 1960s South Africa. Merely 20 years, young and still handsome. I was the youngest PhD staff teacher in Groot Shore Medical School. I proved that the heart was/is not a pump, but the recipient of forces that make it respond as if. Many of my international female students were older, and I was always tempted to respond to their nonstop flirtations twice weekly. In the early morning hours, many of the white female students would come down from their dorms to the auditorium in their bathrobes and hair curlers to set up their tape recorders, only to return later with their sexiest clothes, makeup, and hair done. I know they did this only to impress me. One day I had enough talking into their tapes and turned off all the recorders, much to the chagrin of the male students who enjoyed the fashion show. Predictably, the next time they all came in, unkempt, but without their bathrobes and curlers, and the flirting, gone. I was now just another a-hole teacher, and I couldn't have been more proud. Story 56. I'm a youngish substitute teacher, male by the way, at my nearby high school. The students know me fairly well, and I often get stopped in the hallways for hugs and handshakes and conversations. A few weeks ago, I was subbing for an art class. Everything seemed pretty normal until 6th period rolls around. I'm walking around the classroom making sure the kids are doing their work when I overhear some students trying to get my attention. It's a group of 4, 2 9th graders, 2 12th graders, all girls. Thing is, they were busy talking about fetishes, more specifically, daddy stuff. Of course, I'm not too thrilled to hear any of this, so I tell them to not talk about that stuff, especially so openly in the middle of class. They weren't rude, but they basically ignored me and kept conversing. At least they were much quieter as to not disturb the others from their art. Later on, the 9th grader who I aimed the "please stop talking about this" at starts finding me in the halls, has other classes that I happen to be subbing in, and just goes out of her way to find me during lunch, open periods, etc. She goes on to tell me how I'm the hottest teacher in the school, that I have a nice butt, and she thought I had a small chicken the first time she saw me, as my pants looked tight to her. She's even gone out of her way to tell me about her fetishes, though I tell her to stop every time, and how she posts on weird mobile apps and RP groups. At this point, I try to avoid her if she says anything remotely weird. More disturbing still is that her friends talk about me too, and I've had other kids of varying grades and senior girls tell me I'm the attractive substitute. I've even gone as far as to tell some of them that I'd rather not have them try to hang around me during open periods, solely for the purpose of their weird conversations, and that I wouldn't want to get potentially fired because other staff is getting the wrong idea. I guess I look a lot like Mark Wahlberg and Matt Damon. Apparently that's my selling point to the students, but I don't even take that as a compliment personally. Dude, if you look like Matt Damon, I'm surprised more of the boys aren't looking at you. Holy crap, it's Jason Bourne. Story 57. 30-year-old male middle school teacher here. There is really only one student that sticks out in my mind for this question, and she has never said anything not class-related to me. But every day she just stares at me with this wide-eyed, enraptured look and a big smile. I teach them debate, so every time I mention an interesting point on a controversial topic, she gives me this "you are so smart and interesting" look. Kinda funny, but also really awkward. Story 58. My dad is a 7th grade teacher. Before he had even arrived at his new school, he had a student call his brother, thinking it was him, to profess her excitement to be in his class. Eventually, later in that year, it was reported to my dad by a student that she had been advertising a relationship between her and my dad on social media. He had to report this to the principal, which got the police involved, and in turn, I believe the girl was moved to another school. Now, the best part of this, my dad is a bit of a cheeky bugger. Mr. Offside is a common nickname. So while he's with the cops and principal, he says that her post about their relationship couldn't have been true because they broke up weeks ago. A risky opportunity for a joke, but it had a good ending. Story 59. Youngish teacher at an all-girls Catholic secondary school. I had to deal with a big falling out and fight between two groups of 6th formers, 16 and 17, because one of them liked me and accused another of having a thing with me because I complimented their work. One of the girls actually said I was being flirtatious by praising her writing. Well, I'm an English teacher. It's kind of my job. The whole thing was ridiculous, and I had to keep avoiding one-on-one situations with any of them whilst the senior leadership team sorted things out. Also, whenever a class finds out I'm married, there's usually an audible groan from a few students. I just always have to ignore it. Story 60. I was relatively attractive when I started teaching. I'm marginally attractive now. My first year I taught middle school, and yeah, it was pretty easy to tell, but it was also kind of sweet. There was one little girl who just sat there with her chin resting on her hands that would stare, glassy-eyed at me all day. Flash forward to 3 years ago at my brother's house for Thanksgiving, he has some friends over I had never met. Turns out the girl was there as a nanny and a model and was about to graduate from Pepperdine. They took a picture of me and my wife to show her. Then the woman noticed my wife looked like her. It was kind of an odd day. Story 61. I had a teacher in grade 9 who did some modeling, and all the chicks were nuts for this guy. They'd ask him for hugs and crap, and a lot of the guys would get upset because this guy was getting all the attention. Anyways, one guy in my class found a photo of him modeling and eating an apple with his shirt off with another dude. This guy thought it would kill anything the teacher had going, but nope, the girls just liked him even more. Story 62. Former sub here. Took out my phone to Google something for the kiddos. This combo happened with a would-be Casanova 11th grader. Miss, is that your phone? Yes. Open up a new contact and put Matthew. No thanks. Miss, are you rejecting me? Yes, I am. I've never been rejected before. Story 63. In my early 20s, when I was all over different sites like DeviantArt, I'd get hit on by 15-year-old girls. Not girls around the age of 15, but specifically 15-year-old girls. Apparently, I have the personality type where girls want to be more than friends when they're 15, because I've spoken to a ton of girls, and when their ages are revealed, not a single 18 to 30-year-old is remotely interested in me, except maybe one that I could think of, but she was one of those super serious, all the time, stick in the bud girls. She was hot enough to deal with. After I tell the 15-year-olds I'm in my high 20s, they want to keep trying to get more personal, but I just never flirt or respond to any flirting they do. When I was like 19 though, this one girl said she was 17 and we exchanged numbers just to talk. She always talked about how hard her life was and such, and I figured she needed someone to talk to. Turned out she was 14. I would have blocked her, but she harmed herself apparently, and being 19 myself, I was still a wide-eyed kid who believed in something, so I felt it was my obligation to at least be her friend and let her have at least one person who was nice to her. Sure enough though, she lost interest when she turned 16 and stopped messaging me. I like to think I helped her in some way though. This is why I never use social media anymore and never make new friends online. Making male friends is impossible because most guys are goofy and no women my age are into video games. And if they are, they've been married for years already. So it's like, thanks universe. Story 64. Probably gonna get buried. I was in the last years of my high school and being a rebellious sack of crap, not studying, not getting good grades. Naturally, my homeroom teacher had several counseling sessions with me. In one of the sessions right before finals, she pleaded with me to study properly and she would reward me with whatever I want. At that moment, I wondered if she would have agreed if I'd asked her to let me be with her. She was one of those homely, nerdy, but hot teachers with big melons. She was a really nice person. Story 65. Mr. Blank, I had a dream about you last night. Oh yeah? What was it about? I can't tell you that. Everyone giggles around her. I pass out papers and they continue to whisper as I circle the room. I arrive back near them. Mr. Blank, do you know what a TILF is? Seriously? You just said that out loud? To my face? Oh boy. Also, I get a lot of comments about my pants. You look really good in those pants. Those pants look really great. Those pants are nice. Story 66. I teach English as a second language in high school. I was explaining the meaning of the word tease, which in our mother language coincides with the word butt. From the back of the classroom, a female voice goes with something like, "He's got a nice tease." That was followed by the longest 3 seconds of my life, deciding on whether to react to that or to pretend I didn't hear it. I let it slide and blamed it on the teenage hormones. Story 67. True story. My son was enrolled in first grade, Section B. Came home and demanded that he be shifted to the next Section C. Why? Because his present teacher is ugly and the other one's beautiful. It was an embarrassing situation. We went to meet the headmistress, who was initially a bit surprised that we took the time and effort to come to school with this request, but she refused to oblige. I saw the other teacher at a PTA meeting. She was really hot. My son befriended the hot teacher's son and would find reasons to go to her house. First crush at 6 years old. Story 68. Gym teacher at my high school made it into the Bleacher Report top 30 hottest NCAA athletes one year. Needless to say, she is talked about a fair amount. At our pep rally in the weeks leading up, they have donation boxes dedicated to teachers, and whichever one gets the most money, that teacher has to take a pie tin full of whipped cream to the face. Her box easily won, but the executive decision was made by the office that someone else would take the hit, probably to avoid the teacher's name cream pie chance. Story 69. I'm a young male teacher who teaches at inner city schools. I've had a few of the female middle school students make some odd remarks when I first started. This year, it really turned into something serious I had to report. At first, the remarks were simple. "Oh, mister, you look handsome and nice today," which I would simply just reply thank you and keep on moving. Then one of the 8th grade girls started getting flirty. She'd show me her Instagram and ask if she looked cute in her pictures. I'd kindly tell her that was inappropriate for me to comment on and to go sit back down. Then she started asking me some really intimate questions with the excuse that she was unaware of what she was talking about. "What's a BBC? A guy said he wants to use that with me? What's that mean?" I of course said I had no idea and couldn't help her with that. That same day that happened, the girl started yelling out loud that I told her what a BBC was, and that's where I lost it. I made sure to set her straight because I didn't want it to get out of hand. I went to the principal to report it as well. She got talked to. She's still flirty, unfortunately, but I ignore it. That was an 8th grade girl, mind you. I also have a 7th grade girl who started to ask personal questions about my girlfriend and has started finding excuses to touch me. Last week, she straight up asked me if my girlfriend gives me intimate favors. I was shocked at her boldness. Of course, I went to the principal again. Principal explained that she comes from a tough background, and her guardians have placed her in that school because she was caught being intimate with a boy at her old one. Inner city kids are rough, man. Story 70. Probably too late to the game, but anyways, like a lot of people have said here, I'm not a professor or teacher, just a TA. I'm responsible for making and grading all homework assignments, tests, projects, etc., and the kids know it. I'm not sure this story is because of my looks or my position, but I'm guessing my position. Just last week, I sent an email about a project assignment that I recently gave out that is a little bit challenging, telling all the students that I'm available to meet and answer questions about it, give pointers, that kind of thing if they want any help. This girl asks me if I can help her out in her apartment, which happens to be right behind the building I work in. I say, "Yeah, sure, I'll be over after work." I left work and walked over to her place. I knock and she says, "Come in." I do, and she's sitting on her futon in her underwear. I asked her if I should step back outside while she gets changed, and she smiled and said nope, while pushing one bra strap to the side. "You should stay and help with class." I told her to let me know if she has any real questions about class, and walked out before I ever took my backpack off. I should mention that she's not even really getting a bad grade. She has a B, and I think overall she's a really good student. I'm also about 80% certain she has a boyfriend. Story 71. It's not my main job, but I do teach one class at a university. Or I used to, back in the day. I admit that I was probably fairly fit. I didn't work out too much, but I got plenty of exercise through my main hobby. I guess it's more of a lifelong pursuit than a hobby, and occasionally it pays real dividends. Anyway, one time I was in the middle of lecture, and one of the women in class closed her eyes, which were otherwise probably picturing me naked based on the look in her face, and it looked like she had something written on her eyelids. I started to lose my train of thought, and I powered through until she closed them again, and I noticed that one of them said, "Love," and the other said, "You." Luckily, the class ended there. I got flustered, half because I thought about whipping it out. It had been quite a while since I had seen the love of my life. Story 72. I used to work at an alternative school that had kids from middle school and high school in the same building. My class was more like in-school suspension than a traditional classroom, and I only worked there for half of the school year. Anyway, I had a bunch of young girls in the class and just barely heard them say something about effing Mr. Blank. I left the classroom to turn some papers in at the office, and my supervisor switched off with me while I was gone. When I got back, she met me outside and whispered that I didn't do anything wrong, but while I had these girls in my class, I should keep my door open at all times for my own protection. She wouldn't tell me what they said when I walked out. Story 73. I totally had drunk intimate relations with my professor's married assistant in college. I got an A in that class, sociology. She was so attractive. She always sat next to Dr. Davis, answering questions, grading papers, walking around class, helping students. It was something about her being an authority figure, smart and physically pretty, that drove me crazy. I lived off campus, and she actually lived in the same apartment complex as I did. One day I saw her out on the stoop. I stopped by to ask her a question about an assignment. She invited me up. I had a way of surprising people because I was a typical pretty boy on the exterior, but I also had deep intellectual opinions on various subjects. I hit her with my views on gentrification. She offered me some gin. I knew it was about to go down when she said that she gets crazy when drinking gin. I woke up the next morning in her bed and had the walk of fame back to my apartment. I was a sophomore, 19. She was in her 30s. College, America. Story 74. I'm a young male gymnastics teacher, and I taught all girl classes for the most part. I'm a good gymnast myself, so if they behaved, I would show them some of the tougher skills I knew at the end of class. Usually just a back tuck or a couple of corkscrews. If you know what that is, +5 brownie points to you. One girl fancied giving me hugs at the end of class to show her appreciation, but these girls are under 9 years old, so they're tiny. Unfortunately for me, if I didn't stoop down to their level in time, they'd hug me around the waist, and it's very uncomfortable considering their parents and my boss are usually watching my classes. I quickly learned to anticipate hugs and made them as brief as I could, or giving them sideways, one-armed hugs to appease them. Story 75. Not a teacher, but a soccer coach. When I was 18, I coached a 13-year-old girls' soccer team, and it was effing dreadful. All they did was stare at my chicken when I talked. I was standing on the sidelines with them while we did a drill, and one bent over to grab a ball and started grinding towards me. I promptly walked away. After practice, they would always ask to tackle me, and I always declined. But one day they mobbed me, and one literally grabbed me. I dated a Catholic girl for the majority of high school, so unfortunately, I think that was the first time someone ever grabbed me like that. Ugh, middle school girls are effing terrifying. Story 76. I once had a student ask me on my last day of student teaching, "You won't be my teacher anymore, right? How about coffee?" I told him it wouldn't happen even if I wasn't his teacher. That got a loud "ooh" from the rest of the class. Had another student on the last day of a long-term subbing position ask me to prom. I declined nicely. At the end of the day, he showed up in my room with his friend, shut the door, and they proceeded to have an odd conversation about which one of them I liked more. I asked politely for them to open the door. They refused, and when I tried to open it myself, they stood in front of it. I started to panic when another student opened it from the outside, and the boys quickly left. Scary stuff working with almost adults who have no impulse control. I have a few other stories, but those are the ones I remember most. I will say, though, the kids who have a crush on you will be outed by their friends. Teenagers are so nice that way. Story 77. 2 stories for you. 1. A girl in my class at school was sleeping with one of the student teachers. She was 18 and he was 20. They met on a night out, didn't realize they were working or studying in the same school. All got weird when he arrived in English the next day. 2. I had a teacher that I swear had a crush on me. She was my geography teacher, never mean to me and let me snooze in her class, whereas the guy next to me, also falling asleep, would get a grade of bullocking. I remember there were a few times she would stand behind me with her hand on my shoulder or playing with my hair. I was off ill for a few days after a bad rugby injury and needed to catch up on coursework. So I would use my lunch times to catch up and eat lunch in the class, often with her. She sat next to me in her gym gear. She normally wore smart casual teacher stuff. I figured she had been using the school gym. Everyone did. So while doing coursework, she sits next to me, sports bra and yoga pants, and is taking me through a few of the points, and while doing it, she's rubbing her leg up and down mine. She was really in my personal space. 17-year-old me was literally just trying not to, show in any physical way. Nothing much happened after that other than a really long hug at the end of our leavers prom. It only stopped because the chemistry teacher told her that her taxi was here and they were leaving together. Story 78. We had this hot teacher who taught us biology in 9th grade. She had a big chest and people used to fight over sitting on the first bench just to get a glimpse of those huge assets. I also remember that some of the boys used to drop stuff on the floor near her foot so that when she bent over to pick it up, the whole class got to see something. Story 79. As a young adult in my 20s, I went on a date with a gym teacher from a local high school. He was hot stuff, and the girl loved him. Well, he used to date the Spanish teacher, and while he and I went out to eat one night, there was the Spanish teacher out with a bunch of guys from the school, drunk, eating dinner, and flirting with all of them. That was interesting. Story 80. I taught English in China after college and had a fairly aggressive student who asked me to go on vacation with her and her family. I tried to sidestep by saying, "Oh, thank you so much, but that doesn't sound very appropriate, and I'm sure your parents want to just have a family vacation." Turns out that the parents had pitched the idea because they found out about their daughter's crush and wanted to parlay it into a marriage. Story 81. This happened at my high school to the younger teachers that were unfortunate enough to end up teaching my year group. My year group in high school was one of the worst the school had ever had. Many expulsions, lots of bullying, and a lot of out-of-control kids. Whenever there was a new student teacher, each class group would strive to see who could make them quit the fastest. One particular time, a good-looking young male student teacher was attempting to control our English literature class, and Jade decided it was time to put him in his place. We were 13 at the time, but Jade was well developed, looked like a model, and looked about 18. She unbuttoned the top of her shirt, and before the teacher had time to respond, she was sitting on his lap. Now, he isn't allowed to touch her, so he had his hands up and was freaking out. She was saying all kinds of things to him about how she was a bad student. The class thought it was hilarious, but really it was a very mean thing to do to him. He never came back to our school. We also had a couple of insanely hot full-time male teachers who were quite happy to be a little inappropriate. On one class trip, Mr. Mackenzie came out of the showers in just a towel, knowing full well there was a group of girls sitting in the corridor. Dang, he was hot. He stood up and chatted to us for quite a bit of time, just dripping. Quite happy to engage in some flirting with the group. There are so many stories. That school was nuts. We could use a Chris Hansen in so many of these. Story 82. When I taught at a high school, I was a 29-year-old. A fairly sizable group of girls would speak audibly about what they imagined the size of my chicken was. Girls would make moaning noises or follow me around for my attention. I gave one girl a talk about to respect my space, but it never helped. Nothing was ever physical though, so I'm lucky. I caught one girl taking pictures of my butt. Another had a picture of me printed out in their binder. Most of the stuff you just have to let go. Let girls be girls. Story 83. One of my 6th graders was insane about it. She would ask her classmates, in front of me, if it was okay to have intimacy with an adult. She would draw pictures of my girlfriend dead and make comments about how she was going to unalive her. It started out cute and silly and got pretty disturbing, to the point that I had to talk to her grandmother about it. I still felt really bad because she wasn't a bad kid. I think I was her first legit adult crush and she just didn't know how to handle it. Story 84. I had a huge crush on my 12th grade mythology teacher. Being my senior year, I didn't really care to keep the flirting down. She was a student teacher from her college. Anyways, the school year ends and I go on a cruise ship to the Bahamas. I'm walking around the water park, Atlantis, with one of my good friends when I stop in my tracks and think, I know this lady. Eventually I decide, F it, I gotta go see. Turns out it was my teacher and she was on vacation being a nanny. But oh my gosh, did she look ever so fine in her bikini. I apologize for it if there was ever an instant I made her uncomfortable. I was just trying to be funny in class. I wish there was a happy ending to the story, but she told me don't worry, she was flattered and thought I was cute. Oh, Mrs. H. Story 85. I used to have a huge crush on my junior high principal, Mr. Wilson. He was a gorgeous Irishman with the most amazing smile. He was such a happy, kind man. I used to fantasize about him after I had graduated high school. But here's the tragic part. Mr. Wilson died after he was in a skiing accident. He survived the accident, but he didn't survive the tumor they found in his brain when they went to scan him for any damage. There's almost not a day that goes by when I don't think about him and wish he was still alive, just so I could tell him thanks for being so nice to me when I was an awkward kid without many friends. Story 86. When I was still in my NQT year, first year of teaching, I was teaching a class, and I had a feeling one girl had a crush on me. Lots of whispers, friends giggling, etc. But one day I let the class in and sat down to do my shoelaces up. The girl walked over, looked me in the eye, and said, "Doing your shoelaces up, sir?" "Yes," I said. Then, in as sexy of a tone as she could muster, "Can I help?" Took her about 3 seconds to realize how weird that sounded, and her friends peed themselves laughing. Coincidentally, I did an after-school revision session, and she was the only one who turned up. I opened every door and window I could and made sure another member of staff was nearby as well. Bad territory. On another occasion, I confiscated a girl's phone while she was texting, and happened to notice she was texting, "Sir's got a great butt." I ignored it and pretended I hadn't read it. Story 87. One student actually gave my butt a squeeze. Another referred to me as a TILF. Some contact me years after graduation bringing me birthday cakes or comping me drinks at their waitress gig. All sounds great and complimentary on paper, but these moments can sometimes be very uncomfortable. Story 88. Helped in a British play scheme. Daycare over summer whilst kids are off at school for 8 to 12-year-olds. All other assistants were female, and I am not particularly attractive. Overweight 20-year-old, but I have a beard. Apparently kids think beards are really cool. Regularly have kids asking if I was dating other helpers, if I was married, the works. Then one day one of the girls slapped my butt as I walked past. Another invited me over for food at her parents'. It was also my birthday whilst I was working. I received multiple love notes and anonymous cards that had been cobbled together with whatever they could find. One girl made me a love ring out of pipe cleaners and PVA, which was interesting. After that, I'm not sure I would work with kids again. I was so uncomfortable the entire time I was there, it was unbelievable. Story 89. Not a teacher myself, but my father was for 31 years. And I had him for freshman year science in high school. All the girls would tell me they wanted to bang my dad and how manly he is. While it kinda sucked knowing the ladies wanted your dad and not you, it did give me hope for my future old... That's gotta be a sucky feeling, man. Hope wherever you are, your dad's not interfering still. Story 90. English teacher in Taiwan here. Culture differences here allow for certain questions that would be inappropriate in the States. Most of them are harmless, like, do you have a girlfriend? Kind of questions. But on one occasion, one of the teachers asked me how big I was in front of a class of middle schoolers. Story 91. The teacher I dated probably figured it out when I started showing up to her room before school started every morning. Just hung out there with her for the 20 minutes between when the bus dropped me off and when school actually started. Sometimes I'd do some work, sometimes just talk, but anything to be around her. Story 92. Used to teach elementary to high school kids in English. All my middle school students persistently asked to play StarCraft, I alongside them afterwards. They didn't think I spoke their language and I usually kept mum, so there have been many instances before class where they would rate the female teachers by looks. A little bit of a confidence boost, but it felt very odd being physically assessed by pubescent Korean kids. Story 93. Hardly attractive, but a story nonetheless. When I was 17, I was doing work experience in a primary school for year 4 kids 8 to 9 years old. And one of the girls couldn't resist but hug my legs and not let go for as long as she could at the start and end of each day. It really was quite sweet. Come then, end of my 2 weeks experience, and there was some high drama as there was a breakup of a relationship in the class. The subsequent rumor was that the leg hugger girl had dumped her in-class boyfriend. I didn't even know 9-year-olds had boyfriends and girlfriends, in hopes of asking me to marry her. Poor 9-year-old boy must have hated me. Story 94. I'm a junior math teacher, and there are tons of girls, and a few guys, that have crushes on me. My first year teaching, I had a girl who was always sneaking pictures of me after school, and one day I called her on it. I asked why she was always taking pictures, and she goes, because I think you're a hot daddy. There were some other students in my room, and one of them was like, girl, you keep that crap in your head. Do not tell him that. I was so glad she said it so I didn't have to. I have other students show me their friends' Snapchat stories with pictures of me on it. Most of the captions are pretty raunchy or have things like, 4 more months until I'm 18. Story 95. I was a student of an attractive teacher in high school. Skinny Asian lady who could have passed for early 20s. Everybody in the small class knew she was good looking. And one day a couple of girls asked if any guys had hit on her. She said there was a kid who was always too nice to her and would stay after class. Not sure if it was her birthday or Christmas, but the kid brought in a present for her, a set of lingerie from Victoria's Secret. She had to set some boundaries after that one. Story 96. Semi-related to the question, but I had my young, somewhat attractive by virtue of his relative youth to the rest of the faculty math teacher book me at the escort service I worked at. I didn't realize where I knew him from until afterwards when we were lying there, chatting, butt naked. He told me he was a teacher in the area of town where he taught. I don't think he recognized me as I skipped his class a lot. He worked at 2 different schools I attended, but obviously I was one of very many students. That was an interesting call to say the least. I'd already told him where I grew up, so I'm sure he could have guessed. We both just talked about things and played it cool. Then we went for round 2. So all you female or gay male students and the rare, very talented, very driven straight male students who dream of one day feeding it to your teacher, your wishes may come true. One day they may pay you for the privilege. You just gotta be willing to do some gnarly stuff with a lot of old men to pay for your school, feed your kids, or fund your scorching drug habit. Good luck.